Hey everybody, it's Gwen. So I've been getting a lot of returning views and lots of questions regarding one of my most popular videos on the channel, The People v. Snyder, and why I dropped that as a series I was working on. A lot of people love that video. I mean, a lot of people also didn't, but to this day, it's probably still the video that brings me the most traffic, no matter how little that traffic might be nowadays. Granted, part of the reason why it probably gets so much traffic is because I ended on a cliffhanger. But fascism is not the only thing Zack Snyder has been accused of perpetuating in his art. Far from it, in fact. So please, join me next time for part 2, where I'm going to be diving into the concerns of objectivism in Snyder's work through the lens of superheroes. But also, I'm a different person now than when I made that video. Like, that was 5 years ago. I was 23, I was louder and more confrontational. Also, pretty pretentious, come to think of it. And not that I entirely disagree with every point that I made in that video, I actually still agree with the general thesis. It's just the degree to which I zealously reach those conclusions and quite honestly assumptions as a young, politically engaged trans woman in leftist spaces who really hated the weird villainization of Zack Snyder within those spaces, it's not really something I'm proud of these days. And honestly, there was some analysis there where when you take a step back and just look at it without going into overdrive with pattern recognition, which is something you tend to do whenever you're spicy brained like myself, you realize the curtains are just blue. Sure, all art is political in the sense that all art, as Kamala Harris would put it, exists in the context of a politicized world and all that comes before and after its creation, but not every artistic choice has explicit political intentionality behind it. Like, in the case of Zack Snyder, I do think he is trying to say things with his art. I wouldn't go as far as to say there isn't really much going on in his movies, you know, like Patrick H. Willems would.
I think Zack Snyder's movies are not nearly as toxic and hateful as their detractors say, and also not nearly as smart and layered as their fans say. I think people who hate Zack Snyder and who love Zack Snyder are both giving him a bit too much credit. Because after giving this a whole lot of thought, after rewatching the man's entire filmography, I have come to the conclusion that these movies are mostly pretty dumb.
At the same time, however, I do feel it would be a bit too charitable to suggest that everything he does is indicative of any personal ideology he has or some big political idea he's trying to push within his filmography. A lot of Zack Snyder's critics really latch on to the whole objectivism thing, but when you actually look into why he's wanted to adapt The Fountainhead for so long and why it's such a foundational work of art for him as a filmmaker, it has much less to do with Ayn Rand's actual political or ideological leanings, and much more to do with his own perception of it as a highly romantic, almost mythic vindication of his own individuality as an artist.
Maybe that's why I love Fountainhead, you know, like it's that process of like getting people to like believe in this thing that it's going to take resources and like so much crew and building and designing and all that other work that's down the road. It's the drawing that I think is a little bit of it satiates that desire a little bit for me. This super adaptation of that book, and I just think I think it would be amazing. But you know, no one wants to make it because they think it's like, you know, it's taboo. Ayn Rand is taboo.
Well, why is she taboo?
I don't know. She's taboo among the intelligentsia because like they think she's a fascist and they think the book's a fascist propaganda, piece of fascist propaganda. That's not why I like the book. I'm like, look, you know, I happen to just like it because to me, it's a direct comment on making a movie, right? It's a movie about an architect who won't make the buildings that everyone wants him to make, and like what the struggle he goes through to get the buildings made the way he wants to make them. Of course I like that, you know? Ayn Rand wrote Fountainhead in direct response to being noted on a script that she had written. And she had been studying this movie about skyscrapers, and they told her, she kept submitting versions of the script, and they kept noting her until it was unrecognizable. And then she was like, this is what happens to work. You know, it gets noted till it disintegrates, until it disappears. And so that's one thing I had that I've always wanted to do, but I don't know that I don't know that the world will allow that.
To him, it's an ode to the individual artist or the auteur. And say whatever you will about auteur theory, I don't really care, because even within collaborative mediums like film, we as artists tend to care a lot about our individuality and unique expression. You know, otherwise this whole debate we've been having about AI art over the last 2 years wouldn't mean a damn thing. To Zack Snyder, it's not some philosophical textbook on how to be a self-centered, apathetic prick like most of Ayn Rand's writing. And I feel like a lot of people in the video essay or film analysis space tend to pretzel themselves into being armchair psychologists and philosophers going above and beyond to attribute everything they dislike about Snyder's films into some grand ideological leaning that actively corrupts every aspect of his work, when really they're just getting caught up in the big idea. Like, if you want to watch a video that relates to this problem in better detail, go watch Abigail Thorne's video, The Problem with Video Essays. She really hits the nail right on the head. But also, what I was doing was also getting caught up in the big idea, just from an opposite angle. And it's something I really started to notice as I was writing part 2. I didn't really have the words to describe it then, but I knew I was making connections to things that likely weren't ever there, and making things out to be bigger and more important than they probably ever were. Basically, I was like an art critic over analyzing a Jackson Pollock painting.
Jackson Pollock had this exhibition about 1935, I can't remember the date fully, but he had this big white canvas, right? And this was the whole bit. This was the main exhibit. He just got a big bucket of black paint, threw it at the canvas, smeared it around, and then put in 2 little splashes of red paint. That was it. Then he fucked off. So they asked this art critic, this waste of space, they go, what do you think of this piece? And he goes, interesting. I believe that this is a self-portrait of Jackson. Well, I believe the blank canvas initially represented the earth, pre-humanity, vast, pure, clean, loads of potential. But the black paint itself, that represents humanity. Random, chaotic, often overlapping, no start or end in sight. Just constantly moving, no idea where it's going to go, and no idea whenever it's going to stop. But all we can tell is that it's constantly repeating its history and often overwriting it. And we can deduce that one day it will eventually consume all of the earth. But the 2 red dots, these are Jackson. Small, insignificant, yet they stand out against the rest of humanity. 20 minutes later, Jackson Pollock, the fucking artist, turns up. And they say, Mr. Pollock, thank you so much for putting on this wonderful, wonderful, wonderful exhibit. Just a quick question in regards to the main piece. Can we just ask you, what do the 2 red dots represent? And Jackson Pollock, on record, said, what? I must have splashed it when I was painting that one. Just because you can find meaning in art doesn't necessarily mean that was the meaning the artist necessarily intended to be there. Take into consideration that you might just be a pretentious fucking cunt, okay?
I was making the exact kind of video I would hate if it came from a perspective I disagreed with. It was a bad video. I couldn't go through with it. It was quite literally a situation of me being too close to the picture, and I very clearly needed to step away. And that's the reason why I never continued the series after that. Well, there is one other reason. You see, when you make content that's positive about Zack Snyder's work and are a fan of his films, you tend to find yourself within the community of his fan base, as they're like-minded people, and they latch on to your work and really like what you do, especially since it's kind of a special niche to have content that holds his movies in relatively high favor. And I would like to say right up front that most people who like Snyder's films are pretty normal. They're no different than people who are super passionate for the next Chris Nolan or Rian Johnson joint, but amongst this crowd are some deeply vile, toxic, and just manipulative people that nearly ruined my life multiple times, and not just mine, but also people I care about. It all really became clear to me when I started being critical of Zack Snyder's movies, even when I still liked them, as well as of certain narratives built within the community that allowed them to be so zealous in their love for his films. Narratives that claim to be for artistic freedom, but when that same artistic freedom was granted to people with very different sensibilities to Snyder, such as James Wan, Matt Reeves, or James Gunn, it was always treated as a flat-out insult to art and everything Snyder did. It was quite literally a situation of, for me, not for thee, as well as narratives that manipulated Ray Fisher's actual experiences with racism within the studio system for really weird, selfish gain within the Snyderverse movement, rather than treating it as a normalized systemic failure within the general entertainment industry that needed to be understood and tackled as a whole. And that one in particular got me in a lot of heat, because while that was the point I was ultimately making, it's not a good idea to start a deeply nuanced and intersectional dialogue like that when you are a frustrated white girl in your mid-20s and stuck with Twitter's outrage culture and very minimal character limit. You'll probably accidentally say some stupid, misguided shit. It doesn't really matter how woke you think you might be. But no matter how my well-intended yet ignorant ass handled that situation, it was made infinitely worse by one specific Snyder fanatic that made it his mission to make my life a living hell. That person was, of course, the infamous toolbag Mercury, who you've probably at least heard of passively if you've been trenched in the DC fan community on Twitter for any time within the last 5 to 10 years. Basically, this was a man that actively tried to defame me as a belligerent racist who was grifting off of the Snyder fandom, which really drew ire from that community and made me the target for several bouts of dogpiling that still give me tons of anxiety today as someone who still uses social media. I was basically public enemy number 1 overnight. And that's still not the most egregious shit he did to me. When I was very vulnerable about not having a job at a time when I was really struggling, and I mean way worse than I am now as someone who is trans and unemployed at the time where we're entering a new recession. He ridiculed me for it and also got a bunch of his followers to join in on it. All from behind the safety of a block, by the way. I couldn't see that he started the harassment campaign until I noticed where the massive flux of hate was coming from. Honestly, this is one of many reasons why I'm not on Twitter anymore. And why was he humiliating me on such a grand scale like this, you might ask? It was because I was very open about not liking Rebel Moon, like, at all. I genuinely feel it is the single biggest fumble Zack Snyder's ever made as an artist. At least until he releases the movie he's making with Dana White. And I was also kind of critical of him signing a Zionist letter around that time, like most of Hollywood, and finding that a tad hypocritical given the themes he was tackling in Rebel Moon. But honestly, that's really neither here nor there. The real thing that left me messed up from that entire experience was how few of the people I thought were my friends within that fandom actually called out Mercury's behavior or stood up for me. Hell, some of them even continued to follow him and engage with the narrative he was forming around me, and it fucked me up. As someone that's already struggled with mental health a lot, as you can see in my Starfish video, I just pretty much shut down. Even if there was ever a desire to resurrect my series on Zack Snyder, that whole experience effectively buried it for good.
The bat is dead. Bury it. Consider this mercy.
And as I tried to continue doing video essays, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed making them, they just never felt the same after that, and they didn't get the same recognition either. It's kind of the reason why I've been so offish about making video essays recently. Like, it just no longer feels worth the effort or the pain of it all. Especially when I'm making something that kind of misrepresents the art I really love, as well as feeling unfulfilled because I'm not really making my own art. I love Zack Snyder's Sucker Punch. It's one of my favorite movies, and I'm actually one of the few people who could say that. But why would I torture myself trying to justify or properly convey why I love it so much in an overproduced, overwritten video that no one's gonna watch, when I could just be betting on myself and the stories I want to tell? I mean, hell, even if I am going to be showcasing other people's films, wouldn't I want to at least have fun with it and share it with friends in a communal way that is insightful, but also not pretentious as fuck? Like, yeah, I just want to make my own art and have fun with my friends experiencing other people's art. I'm done feeling like I have to justify my love for things with overlong deep dives built on half-truths and assumptions that ultimately lack the kind of nuanced context to the creation of that art for the sake of getting it. That Starfish video I brought up earlier is probably the best video I've made, because firstly, I actually appreciated and acknowledged the context behind the creation of that film, why it was so odd and sad of a film, really. It was an emotional time capsule of a person dealing with grief and their whole reality crumbling around them. It was someone bleeding onto the page and processing things they didn't even fully understand. But also, it was the closest I ever got to treating a video essay like art. It was far less about the big idea, and more so just about me and how the film connected to my soul in a time where I was also dealing with my own reality crumbling. Hell, the entire world was dealing with that at the time of me making the video. That was actual engagement with the art. I was also bleeding onto the page, not simply trying to get it or analyze it, just empathizing with it and sharing my own pain. It was the most honest thing I've ever made, and that means more to me than convincing myself and others that I'm smarter than I am or more intuitive to an entirely different artist's grand statement or intent with a piece. That's not what art's for. Not at all. Art is meant to be felt and understood through empathy and appreciation of craft, not to be a contest of superior taste and pseudo-intellectualism. I feel video essays and chasing viewership in an age of endless content creation incentivized by media conglomerates in Silicon Valley might have made us forget that. But yeah, I don't know. That's really all I had to say on that.
One of the things that I think is that goes lost is what a young art form cinema is. You know, literature is, thousands of years old. Acting is so old. People have been sitting around the campfire singing and telling stories and taking on roles, and a witch doctor puts on a hat and plays this part. This stuff is really old. But movies, it's like 100 years old. It's so young, and big business is eating it. It's just eating it alive. And they even want to say, as soon as you say art or cinema, people roll their eyes like you're pretentious. And in my own personal sense of idealism, I sometimes made this mistake of making others feel judged. And what I wasn't clear on is that I don't have the ability to judge it. I'm pressing myself to understand myself and what it is I want to do. I have lived long enough to know that there is not one right way and there is not one wrong way. I certainly don't know the right way. You know, I know things that feel bad to me, and I know things that feel good to me. And connecting with other people really, and feeling their art, and giving other people a chance to communicate, and feeling heard, feeling witnessed, and witnessing other people. That feels good.
So yeah, if you ever wanted to know why I abandoned that video series, you now have an answer as to why. You were one of the people asking for the last 5 years. You have a video for that now. But I would like to also say, just so it doesn't get misconstrued, I don't think Zack Snyder's a bad guy. I may have my disagreements with some things that he's done, and, you know, certain opinions he may or may not have. I don't know. I think that his last few artistic choices have been pretty significant missteps, especially the Dana White thing. I don't know where that's going right now, but I'm also really excited to hear that he's finally getting a long-term passion project off the ground, The Last Photograph, which is a project I've been championing for a really long time as a fan of his, because like it's really just this massive love letter, the way he's described it, to photography, which is a world that an art form that he knows thanks to his mother. And, you know, the film really seems to be a lot about that, and the way that he's discussed it in podcasts and whatnot has really left me fascinated. And I really want to see that movie, because I think it's probably the most vulnerable we're ever going to see Zack Snyder as an artist. So that does excite me quite a lot. I would also like to thank anyone who has subscribed to me recently, and I put up a GoFundMe to help me and Jenny with our medical transition at this time, and that's been going well. If you want to check that out, please feel free, or you can check out my Patreon, which is another option to support me monthly. The people who have supported me on my Patreon, it's been lovely, and I thank you guys so much. Every time I make a video, I want to make sure that you guys know I'm very thankful. Y'all have paid for my food a few times, so it's been very helpful. With all that said, I don't really have much else to give other than please. I keep bothering you guys with this. I say it every time, but please go check out Curse Cinema Cube, which is the show I do with Josh and Steve, and we have fun with it. Like every time we record, and when we're editing, it's always a blast, and it's a fun show, and I really want to see it take off. But yeah, that's all I have for now. So be sure to keep a steady stride, and I'll see you all on the other side.